Hello again, everybody. Hope everyone's having a great day. This has been just an incredibly thought-provoking and exciting day for me. Hope it has been for you as well. This session, I'm sure, will only continue that trend. Once again, my name is Michael Igoe. I'm a reporter with Devex on the news team, and really delighted to be here today with Dr. David Walton, who's the coordinator of the U.S. President's Malaria Initiative. David, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So PMI, I'm sure many folks in this room are very familiar with your work, but you're the lead initiative on malaria for the U.S. government. I've been around for about 20 years, I think, and stand now at a really critical moment in the effort to defeat a disease that's been around for thousands of years. I believe that medical writings, Chinese medical writings from 2700 BC talked about malaria. It was found in remains from the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago. So we're talking about a disease that has been part of the human condition for most of our history, or for an enormous amount of our history. I wonder if we could just start with the epidemiology and your expertise there. Could you very quickly, seeing that clock ticking down, could you describe the moment that we're in right now, as you see it, in the moment in the effort to defeat malaria?
So great context setting, and just to get straight to the point, when we look at the last 19 or so years, PMI turns 20 next year. We're
Happy
very
birthday.
excited about it. Thank you. When we look, say, from 2000 to the year 2000, 2005 to around 2015, we saw year on year just absolutely tremendous progress in the fight against malaria. Incidence, prevalence, deaths, all going down year on year globally. Around sort of 2015, 2016, the shape of that curve started to flatten out slightly, but still significant progress. Sadly, like many other challenges in health in general during the COVID pandemic, the height of the COVID pandemic, things took a step back. And we're still actually trying to reclaim those gains. And so significant progress, that's sort of important point number one. But I think the second thing to note is that unlike, say, 10 years ago, or even 15 years ago, we're facing a series of new challenges that we didn't have to face before. And we may talk about those things, but we have a new vector on the continent, a new mosquito that is transmitting malaria. We have resistance to insecticides and to antimalarial medications. We have climate shocks, flooding, etc. And so while we're still trying to reclaim the gains that we lost in COVID, we now have a whole series of new challenges that are not only sort of burgeoning, but also becoming more significant and really making things much more complex as we look forward.
As if your job wasn't already hard enough. Let's start with climate change. This strikes me as a really difficult one to confront from an institutional perspective. PMI, I think, works in 27 countries right now. 30 countries, mostly sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Climate change is likely to change the geography of malaria. How, as an agency, are you thinking about that problem? Getting out in front of something that's changing so quickly. Are you going to have to work in new places or work differently? How are you thinking about that?
So it's a really interesting question, Michael, and I appreciate you asking, because I think, I know our time is limited, so I'll hit the top notes here. Essentially, when you look, say, 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road, certain areas are getting warmer and wetter, others are getting hotter and drier. And so the geography, as you're noting, of malaria is shifting slightly. But that's 15 years out. It's happening a little bit now, but that's 15 years out. When we look today, we're actually facing significant challenges today. Let me give you a couple of examples. I mean, actually, even in the past few months, there's been flooding in Kenya. There's been cyclones in Mozambique last year. All of those, you have a baseline of significant malaria, and then you have more flooding and these climate shocks, and it just disrupts housing. It disrupts our tools, bed nets. It's hard to hang a bed net when your home is destroyed. And so the typical tools that we have are rendered sort of ill for purpose or when we face some of those challenges. And so, the climate shocks are quite significant. And so we're really investing as PMI in early warning systems, working with countries. We're looking to pre-position certain commodities. So when floods do come, the supplies are already across that flooded river, so we don't have to ford it, et cetera. I think secondly, and also somewhat perniciously, rainy seasons in, say, the Sahel are getting longer and somewhat unpredictable in terms of the start and stop times. And again, that's critically important. So if you have a country like Senegal, and for years and years, it started in this month and it ended in this month, and it was 3 months long. We prophylax kids against malaria during that time, and which has led to a significant reduction in malaria prevalence for kids with chemo prevention, is what we call it. But in order to do that, you have to you have to procure the supplies, you have to position them, you have to have them delivered, et cetera, and sort of present for those kids. When you don't know the onset and the offset of the rainy season, it becomes much more unpredictable and when that's going to happen. And for example, in Senegal, the rainy season has gone from 3 months to 4 months to now 5 months. And so programmatically, we're having to invest much more. And so while certain areas, back to your question, are changing, the geography is changing, and we may be facing significant changes in the epidemiology and where it shifts. Right now, we're facing very acute challenges in terms of the programming, the rainy season, the climate shocks, and we're really having to advance in real time, trying to find these solutions as we sort of confront climate change.
Let me ask the uncomfortable money question. We're about a week out from the end of the fiscal year in the United States. A really stress-free time for everybody working in the U.S. government. You're a federal employee, and
Sure.
I'm sure you have your own concerns. But even more broadly than this particular budget negotiation, when I talk to folks working in U.S. global health circles, there's a lot of anxiety about sort of the state of overall funding right now. I mean, we're seeing funding levels plateau. We had this sort of golden age when a lot of these new initiatives were created about 20 years ago, really put the US government on the map as a global health leader. You're describing a situation that's getting more complicated, that has hit this sort of crux point where greater investment is needed to sort of get back on a track of rapid malaria eradication. How are you thinking about that? Well, I guess it's a two-part question. How are you pushing for more resources and making the case? And two, how are you thinking about this sort of sustainability piece where, the role of the US government here is not necessarily to be taken for granted in the way that it might have been in the past?
No, those are great questions. And I would say we are grateful for the bipartisan support that we receive in Congress. And each and every day, we're working to put those tax dollars at work in the best ways that we can, in the most effective ways that we can, in terms of malaria control and prevention, with the goal of elimination in the countries in which we work, 27 in sub-Saharan Africa, and then 3 in the Mekong. And so for us, there's always opportunities for additional investment, but we're making the case by executing. We're making the case by proving the point that it's absolutely critical, the work that we're doing abroad, to save lives. There's also an angle to be discussed around global health security. Now, malaria is typically not in the global health security conversations, as you know, but I would remind you that last year we had 10 cases of local transmission of malaria. That hasn't happened in 20 years. Now, there's lots of debate epidemiologically about how that happened and sort of what 20 years of quiescence and now 10 cases all of a sudden. But I say that to not fear-monger, but rather to say the mosquitoes that transmit malaria are still amongst us. In about 32 or 33 states here in the US, those mosquitoes are alive and well. We just eradicated the parasite. Can the parasite be reintroduced at any time? Yes, it can. And so you can make the case that the work that we're doing to save lives, particularly of kids under 5 and pregnant women, not exclusively, but in particular, because those are the most vulnerable groups, are incredibly important to the American people for their own safety. And so these are the ways in which we think about sort of executing and doing the best we can and proving our point around the importance of this issue. Your second question.
Yeah, part two is about, granted, you're making the case, and I hear what you're saying about making it more directly to the American people. But projecting out, we're likely not going to see massive influxes of U.S. funding in the way that we had, a couple decades ago. So how does that change the way that you're thinking about working with partner countries? A lot of the conversation tends to gravitate towards localization, additional, partnerships with local organizations to sustain the fight. Where is PMI on localization now? And how does that sort of inform your approach to the long-term fight against malaria?
A great question around sort of the sustainability piece and localization, and I know you've written a fair amount about that, is part of that, right? And when we see the future of malaria control and again, eventual elimination, we see that local organizations, local scientists, community health workers, that all needs to be over time shifted to where the locus of control and funding really should be, which is on the continent, right? And we're making strides in PMI, in localization, as are other agencies, and I know you've written about USAID in particular. But I would say for us, the sustainability piece is always top of mind. But I think if you look at the other major initiative, PEPFAR, say, they are at a very interesting inflection point in their tenure around sort of in terms of localization and things of that nature. They've made significant progress. But for us, we're a bit earlier in that that journey. When you look at places like Nigeria, when you look at places like DRC, those two countries alone carry over 50% of the global burden of disease. And we also have to think about the macroeconomic climate and all these things. So there isn't a day that goes by that we're not thinking about sustainability. What does sustainability look like, and how are we building that slowly but surely into our programming? Localization is a part of that. Conversations we have with governments is part of that. Advocating for increased domestic spending for malaria for the countries is part of that. But it's a rich tapestry that I think takes time. And I think, again, the time horizon has to be rational. It has to be understood to understand your point is well taken around sort of what we can do and how long we can do it. But I would argue, look at the progress we've made. And I would say, unlike other diseases, when you take your foot off of the gas for malaria, it comes right back. And so we can't afford to sort of step back and say, well, now it's your turn. There has to be a rational, thoughtful, sort of slow, methodical transition that just takes time, right? And again, I would also submit to you, we have some new tools. We may talk about those. We have vaccines, et cetera, but we're just in the process of deploying those new tools, integrating them. We have new tools in the pipeline as well. So I think for us, it's an understanding of where we are, how we're doing the work, integrating those new tools, continuing to improve on the programming that we have already, increasing advocacy to the countries for increased domestic spending, et cetera, localization, and moving forward on that journey.
Great. Well, Dr. Walton, you've left us with some teasers. I'm afraid we're out of time, but we'll have to pick up the conversation again sometime soon. Thank you so much for doing this. Please give Dr. Walton a round of applause.
Thanks very much. Really a pleasure.